So I wanted to take this time to talk about one of the core YAV tenets, which has probably been the most challenging, one of the most challenging and one of the most eye-opening aspects of this year for me. And that core tenet is intentional community. This is one of the core elements of a YAV year, and for many other YAVs across the world and YAV alumni across the world that I know, was one of the main reasons that they chose to embark on this journey. For me, however, it is something that required a lot of learning and adaptation. During your initial interview with the site coordinator, they may ask you what intentional community means to you. I can clearly remember when Luke asked me this question, and I really had no idea what to say. I think I just repeated the phrase back in a more verbose way that didn't actually clarify anything. I also believe that when asked what my biggest challenge in intentional community would be, I said something along the lines of cleaning schedules. It's safe to say my knowledge and perspective towards intentional community was very novice and needed tweaking. Thankfully, this year has provided me with plenty of experiences, interactions, and communities to help broaden my perspective surrounding this notion. So the first big intro I had to this theme was on the New Mexico Pilgrimage for Unity, an ecumenical walking pilgrimage which covers 50 miles over the course of a weekend through the desert in northern New Mexico. All from our house who were able to go alongside a group of many Presbyterians, Roman Catholics, Quakers, Episcopalians, and Unitarian Dan woke up at 4:30 every morning so we could start walking by 5:30. If you all see Kay Huggins in the chat, she was so kind to walk past our rooms with the bell and graciously wake us up every morning. This pilgrimage was certainly a huge test of my endurance, but it was worth it in the end. We were walking 13 plus miles a day in intentional community for one short weekend. We were an intentional community centered towards building unity between faith groups of many backgrounds to create a better world for all of God's children. We built relationships which continue to impact us and make us laugh to this day. But even after having this incredible experience, which introduced me to an intentional community outside of our house, which is where I was still learning what it looked like, it's hard for me to describe. So in classic YAV style, I'm going to give you 3 words which illustrate what intentional community means to me. You can call it my core tenets of intentional community. So for me, it narrows down to intensity, mindfulness, and compassion. Starting with intensity, our house, along with the Tucson YAV site and the site coordinator from Austin, went on a 10-day border delegation to Agua Prieta, Sonora, Douglas, Arizona, and Tucson, Arizona this past November, as Caitlin mentioned. Though the trip was eye-opening and wildly educational, it was also incredibly intense. After all, this was not a simple trip or vacation. This was a trip with a clear message and a clear purpose, which everyone present was tuned into the entire time. It was more than our house just going somewhere together. It was a community rooted in intentionality, engaging in hard work and discourse surrounding the evils around the American-Mexican border wall. It was the intentionality of our community gathered which made this trip so intense. And this notion didn't stop at our border delegation. We have continued to have intense experiences, interactions, and conversations since then. Being in an intentional community such as this, and especially during a time such as this, means being pushed to the edge of your comfortability and exposing yourself to the intensity of the world around you. It was a constant practice of being intensely mindful and tuned in constantly to what we were learning and seeing and who we were talking to and what they were telling us. Which leads me into my second word, which is mindfulness. This notion is probably the one that I find myself practicing most frequently. Mindfulness is certainly a practice which has become wildly popular for our generation, and I think for good reason. When I first came here, I found myself wondering how I was supposed to practice living in an intentional community, let alone do it right. So I started with being mindful of my presence and my actions. At the beginning, it was trying to see where I would leave my shoes or my dishes, and then into how my language and actions were perceived by others both inside and outside of the house. Always having my mental switch turned on and being aware of my presence in the world and how that relates to others. I think now, however, especially now, it has become more important. As I see the protests in the street for George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, lives lost among far too many others, I have to remember to be mindful always moving forward. Mindful of how my skin grants me privileges, and mindful that as a white man spaces systematically set aside for me to be in. Intentional community cannot stop here. It must be a practice of intentionally living my life with mindfulness always, to create a better world and dismantle the systems which favor me and have favored people like me for far too long. Which brings me to my final word, compassion. Our house has been through a lot this year. We all have things which we brought with us, and we all have things which we've taken on during this year as well. Intentional community does mean pushing yourself in an intense effort to be in a difficult place of discussion and action. And it also means being ever mindful of who you are and how your actions alter the world around you. But it also means doing someone's dishes for them when you know they've had a long day. It also means sitting in the silence with each other after a hard morning check-in. It also means giving each other the space to be alone during a mournful anniversary. It means showing compassion to everyone you come across, both inside and outside of your house. Our community, being an intentional Christian community, is called to share the love of God with everyone we encounter to the best of our ability. We are called to be compassionate in thought, word, and deed always. To close, I will admit that while this experience living in an intentional community has been incredibly eye-opening and informative, it's not always fun. I won't speak for every one of us, but I'm sure that I have irked everybody in our house from time to time over the past year. It's hard, it's rough, and it isn't always fun. But that's the nature of the work that YAV puts us in. Work isn't always upbeat and involved. It's hard work, and as our role of accomplices in this justice work and not as frontline workers, it oftentimes can be hard to see an impact. However, I think we will all be thankful for this experience when we go our separate ways in a little over a month. Thankful for the time together, the time alone, and the times which were hard. But most importantly, thankful for the times of intensity, the times of mindfulness, and grateful for all the compassion shown by and given to all of us during this crazy year. Thank you.